Hello, I'm Janice Karen, Director of Policy, Technology, and Innovation at the Massachusetts Health Data Consortium, or MHDC. I run our Data Governance Collaborative, also known as the DGC. We start each of our weekly meetings with a series of industry quick updates to learn about new and proposed regulations, laws, standards, industry initiatives, and other activity. Join us for this week's updates. And if you'll go to the first update, which is the breaking news, about an hour old, folks. HTI 2 has finally been released. Well, technically, it's not formally released yet because it hasn't been published to the Federal Register, but they have announced it and put out a copy of the rule entire. It is possible it will change slightly when it gets published. They always give that warning, but it typically does not. Once it does get posted to the Federal Register, there will be 60 days for comment. It is almost 1,100 pages long. I really wish they'd give us more than 60 days. It is what it is. So I have literally, this was announced an hour ago. So I have only given it the barest of glances so far. But it has some interesting stuff in it. One thing that ONC has done, they have been hinting at this, responding to inquiries about the possibility for some time now, probably about 2.5 years, that they would certify health IT for other types of health IT users. And that has finally happened. So there are new certification criteria for public health that they say, I have not looked at either of these in detail yet, but they say that those are focused primarily on APIs, also with some mind towards value-based care. And then the certification criteria for payers is focused on APIs and EPA. That does not mean there aren't other things in the certification, just that that's the primary focus of. So both of those will warrant a fair bit of examination and content, and you know, we'll definitely go through those. There are also new certification criteria for real-time prescription benefit tools. They had a big RFI on that in HTI 1, so that's not exactly surprising. Another thing they've done is they've continued to advance the version of USCDI that will be considered the national floor. So as of January 1st, 2028, you will have to be using at least USCDI version 4 or above, or the equivalent USCDI version, US core version, which I believe is 7.x. There are also some changes to the information blocking rules, I believe mainly around exceptions, but again, I haven't looked at them in detail yet, and also some additional TEPCA governance rules. So you can find the press release, you see today's date on it, press release about it here. That press release has a link to the PDF with the full rule. Again, it's almost 1,100 pages. I will be reading it. I suggest that folks not do it unless they're really masochists. So I don't know much more than that at this point, but if anyone has any questions or comments or would like to make, like to ask something, I will do my best.
Janice,
All right, go ahead.
this rule does include, what we at MHDC have been waiting for a long time, which is the
That
API certification for both payers and providers for prior authorization.
that it should. That's right. Not just certification in general around prior auth, but also one thing that will be interesting. The first area that ONC actually engaged on for payer certification was not prior authorization, but the first conversations around it came up around AI. So it will also be interesting to see if any of that made it up. But it again, don't know the details of it yet, but it does specifically include certification around all of the CMS APIs in theory, including prior authorization. And it's not clear if there are non-API related prior authorization components yet. Again, have not really had a chance to look at it in any detail. But that will definitely be one of the areas that we look at very closely. Any other comments, thoughts, questions there? All right, well, lots more to come. Let's move on for now. Not quite as long awaited, but definitely something that we've been looking for are new TUFCA documents. These officially came out on July 1st, but they were posted on Monday. As far there are 10. We were expecting 9 documents. There are 10 of them. The last one, treatment exchange purpose implementation SOP, was not expected. It was not expected on either the June list, which is what this is, or the list later in the summer list. So that's a bonus. And so, but you'll note that it does have the facilitated fire standard operating procedure, the delegation of authority SOP, and the directory service requirements policy SOP. Those were 3 that we had particularly highlighted as being things we were looking for and that might affect things that we do and talk about somewhat significantly. All of them are important. It all fits together into a single whole. We'll be looking at all of them. But that's what got released, and again, have not had a chance to look at them in too much detail yet, but happy to try to answer questions. All right, if not, then let's go ahead and move on. All right, so this is Congress has put out an RFI with responses due by August 2nd, asking basically to provide input on the 21st Century Cures Act implementation and proposals in Cures 2.0. And in particular, they ask about there's Cures 2.0 was first proposed, I think, in 2021. So there are some components of it that have been implemented through other means. And so the first question is asking about those particularly. And then the second question is what is missing that would be essential for further progress? And then how can we enhance or improve the effectiveness of things that have already happened in 21st Century Cures Act or that are already listed in Cures 2.0. So there's a link to the RFI file there. And this is really our big opportunity to try to influence not just the regulations, but the underlying laws that sometimes hamstring what the regulators can do when they're building the regulations around things. And that's come up quite a bit in some of our conversations. So this is an opportunity to try to fix some of those things that maybe weren't quite right in the original law, as well as to propose additional things about what we've learned in the interim. So any questions or comments or thoughts there? All right, let's keep going. So this is a final rule that came out. It's effective in about a week. And it outlines additional pharmacy standards that are required for Medicare Part D, as well as indicates some ONC adoption of timelines around NCPDP standard requirements. I don't know, those are probably duplicated in HTI2 would be my guess. I haven't read this entire regulation yet, but I don't know if the regulation itself imposes the standards. It is technically a CMS regulation, so I don't know if it can do that. That's actually an interesting question. But in any case, it basically points to these new standards that ONC is going, these new levels of standards that ONC is going to be supporting, and then talks about how those must be used in CMS, in Medicare Part D in particular. So any questions, thoughts, or comments there? One thing that has come up there before we move on is there were some questions about whether this was solely communication between providers and pharmacies, or whether like payer PBM exchange mandated use of these standards. I did look through the rule for any indication that there was any applicability to PBMs, and I did not find any. That's a preliminary finding. But for I know there was someone, I actually have had a conversation about this rule with someone in the DGC, and that was a topic that came up. So preliminary report back on that.
Janice, this has been a big issue for
Go ahead.
our
Patty.
work on. Okay, sorry. Who is that, Patty?
Yeah, it was
go
Patty, but
first.
you please, you go first.
Okay, I was just going to say, one of the things that was not in the original or in the prior authorization interoperability rule was explicit guidance or rules regarding the prior authorization of drugs covered under the prescription benefit, medications covered under the Part D benefit. This is really important because this basically comes around the other way and says the latest script standards from NCPDP, as well as the required, communications to support those, and the latest, sort of latest specifications, make it much easier for us to incorporate, or make it less difficult, I should say, for us to incorporate medication prior authorizations, part of the work we're doing to automate prior authorizations overall.
Yep. Thanks, Denny. Patty?
So when is, so I know it goes into effect now, but is it starts for prescription plans in 2025?
So what they're doing now is they're saying from the CMS perspective, Medicare Part D must use the new versions as of January 1st, 2027. But you can start using them as soon as you'd like after this rule goes into effect. So they're giving you basically a 2-year lead time to get ready to do it if you need that amount of time. But the standards themselves go into effect, and the reason that they say the rule is effective basically immediately is that you are allowed to start using the new stuff now if you'd like to. Until the rule goes into effect, you are required to use the old versions.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
So-
Anyone else have any comments here?
Janice, and
Yes.
I also have a question other than echo that Danny said, so that is great about the prior auth. I also have a question about the NCPDP, the real-time prescription benefit, like the verification standard. So I don't see it unless you have seen it. So I don't know if that is going to be a different standard or that is referring to also can be using the HIPAA eligibility 270 to 71.
I don't know actually exactly how that's going to work, Lily. We can look into it. Can you shoot me an email with the exact question that you have, and I
Sure.
will look into it. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, because I couldn't find the answer for that one. Yeah, thank you. I will do that.
Yep. All right. Anyone else have any thoughts, comments, questions here before we move on? All right, then let's keep going. All right, ONC has put out another guidance document for HTI-1's DSI support. And what they've basically done is highlighted 9 areas, excuse me, where the DSI requirements were not part of the previous CDS requirements that were in place before HTI-1 went into effect. And so they have a paragraph or two depending on each of these items in this sheet. It was actually a really useful guidance, an interesting guidance document. I'm not going to read all of them, but what they've basically pointed out are a lot of requirements for supporting different types of source attributes and different types of reporting and different ways to, and different sort of assessments around risk that are required. So none of this should be new. This was all part of the HTI-1 rule, which was out in draft just over a year ago and was finalized in January, I think, but certainly about 6 months ago. And we've talked about all of these things before, but this was sort of a nice look at some of the important things that are different for DSI versus the previous certification requirements that were in place before it. Any questions or comments or thoughts there? All right, let's keep going. All right, another small update. Change Healthcare cyber attack. CMS has formally sent out emails that they have extended the deadline for initiating open negotiations in No Surprises Act IDR process if an entity can attest that they were impacted by the Change Healthcare breach. So this is only valid for services that were provided on or after January 1st. The extension is valid through October 12th. And basically there's this form that I linked in the slide that you have to fill out. You don't have to independently apply for any extension or anything, but you have to include this attestation form when you do submit the later, the what would have been late process documents. And they indicate that they will make an evaluation when we get closer to the new deadline for the deadline for this extension as to whether they need to extend it further. So any questions or comments or thoughts there? All right. Again, this came through a lot of these specific IDRs things come via email and they don't have them obviously on the website. So there's no link for further info, but if you need it, feel free to email me and make an attempt to find whatever you need. Let's move on for now though. So another CMS has put out 2 draft FHIR-based ECQMs for public comment. The comment period was actually short and it technically ended last week. I think on Friday of last week. But there were no comments. And there's a note in the posting, the general posting about it, that there were technical difficulties. And so there may still be some opportunity to comment. I have an inquiry pending about that. And so we'll see, although with the recent spate of releases, I don't know if that would be feasible in any reasonable time frame. However, the 2 measures that they put up are safe use of opioids and severe obstetric, I can never say that word, severe obstetric complications. And these are measures that use QI core and CQL to basically fully describe and enable the measure logic and the measure data definitions. And the drafts include a human readable overview, the CQL folder, other resources folder, and then measure specifications in both JSON and XML. You can find it at that link. That's actually the ONC JIRA. And that's where a lot of the CMS quality measures drafts are use that vehicle. And the ticket that's linked is actually sort of the overview ticket. And then there are separate tickets for each of the 2 measures that have the measure contents and in theory, the place where you can supply comments. So any questions about that? All right, let's move on. So CHAI, which is the Healthcare AI organization, has released a draft assurances standards guide. And this is meant to be a playbook for deploying AI in healthcare. It basically has 4 assessment stages. Initial planning stage, readiness for real world, which is sort of small scale pilots, real world, what they're calling real world impact, and full deployment readiness, which is initial deployments, and then large scale and longer term impacts is sort of the ongoing steady state after something's been deployed. It's really designed for self-reporting and self-assessment against a variety of standards for what they're calling trustworthy AI, which is similar but not identical to what ONC calls FAVES and what is the standard for certified health IT. But it's really covering mostly the same stuff. And you can see what the 5 areas of standards are for trustworthy AI, and you can find a link to the guide there. And actually, each of those 4 checkpoints has their own playbook. So there's actually what that goes to is a website with some overview info, and then there's 4 separate subsections, each of which goes to a 40 or 50 page file for that particular stage of operations. Any questions, comments, thoughts there? All right, let's keep going. If you'll stay there for 1 second and pause. I hope you learned a lot from our quick updates. If you're interested in finding out more about the DGC and its other activities, email me at dgc@myhealthdata.org. That email address is also on your screen.